The door slammed so loud, I thought the house itself jumped. I was in the yard, leash in my hand, and Sparky's collar hung empty. My grandson called over his shoulder without turning. "You're too old. Grandpa, we gave Sparky away." The words landed like a fist. I said his name. The yard seemed to swallow it. My chest tightened, my hands shook. I walked to the gate and peered down the street. Nothing. The leash felt like proof of a missing thing. I clicked the clasp like it might make him come back. Silence. The neighbor's cat stared at me like I'd lost something obvious. I went inside slowly, each step heavy, and my phone buzzed. A text, my neighbor's name, and a photo. Sparky's head resting in someone's lap, tail wagging, bright eyes on the camera. The photo was small and terrible. The caption read, "We found a good home." I could feel the cold around my ribs. I called my grandson, straight to voicemail. His group chat? A laughing emoji in the chat thread. I stared at the screen until the living room light blurred. The house felt empty. My hands looked wrong in that light, old stains of work and years crawling under the nails. I thought of the mornings with Sparky at my feet, the way he would nudge my hand when I read the paper. I thought of promises I'd mumbled, promises my own mouth had kept for decades. The leash lay on the table like a small, betrayed thing. I stepped back out and called his name again. The sound of my voice was thin. The first sting was not the loss of the dog. It was the laugh. The idea that someone would decide for me that I was too old. My throat closed around one clear decision. I would not let that pass. I would get answers. I would see exactly what he had done. The photo on my phone made my hands numb. Sparky's ears were perked, tongue out, like he was at a picnic he had never had with me. I could see the strap of a harness that was not mine, the background of a porch I did not recognize. A second message landed. Another image, a smiling neighbor holding the dog like a prize. The words were casual. "We found a good home." Found. They hadn't asked me. The idea of anything being taken and called found twisted inside me. I dialed my grandson again. He sent me to voicemail without a hint of hurry. His voicemail had that careless laugh in it when he was with his friends. I replayed it until I hated the sound. Then I scrolled through old texts. There was my paperwork scanned and sent as a photo the week before. Transfer pending. Someone had scribbled over my name. I sat down hard on the kitchen chair. My hands shook so badly I gripped the counter edge. I looked at Sparky's dog tag on the shelf, the one with my phone number and our small house address. Someone had removed it. Later, a neighbor would text, I saw him take the microchip tag off. A cold knot in my gut loosened into clarity. This wasn't a kindness. It was theft dressed up as relief. I opened the vet folder, pulled out receipt after receipt, records with my signature. Each page felt like a small burned promise. There was a note, a blank form with a signature that might have been mine. Someone had practiced a forgery. The idea of my name written by another hand felt like a deeper wound than the loss of a dog. I realized I needed proof. Paper proof. Witnesses. Someone who had seen what happened. I picked up the phone and walked to the window, as if answers might be walking down the street, like a mailman. I would not be helpless. I would not be made small. I walked across to Mario's house, the boy who lived across the street and always borrowed my mower. Mario's wide eyes took on my face and the leash in my hand like he was witnessing an unfair thing. I showed him the photo and the messages. He shifted, embarrassed and angry. I saw him, Mario said, voice low. He reached for his phone and scrolled until he found the photo he had taken the day before. It was a quick shot of the back of a van with a logo I didn't know and a license plate number clear as a bell. Mario had always liked taking pictures of license plates. He said it helped him remember when people were rude in traffic. He handed the phone to me like it was evidence. The shot showed the van pulling away, Sparky's small head barely visible. Mario's hand shook. He told me he'd watched my grandson place the dog in the van and talk to a man I didn't recognize. They were laughing, he added, and his jaw tightened. They said something about not wanting old dogs. The van's plate would later trace to a private rehoming service with a bad name. It was a moment my suspicion turned into an ugly fact. They had not found a home. They had handed him to a machine that sold animals like packages. I put Mario's phone into my pocket and felt suddenly tired and fierce. I want to go find him then and there, to run down the street and grab the leash back. But I knew running would be what they wanted, a spectacle that let them call me irrational. I breathed in, steadying myself. I would be careful. I would follow the paper trail. I would make each step count. Mario promised to keep an eye out and to text me anything he saw. His silence afterward felt like an oath. I walked back to my house like a man who had just found a map, the X marked not in treasure, but in loss. I sat at my little table, spread the papers, the vet bills, the photos, and began to plan. The plan had to be quiet, exact, and final. I made a list on a legal pad. Proof, witnesses, leverage. I underlined each word until the pen bled. Revenge, I told myself, would be precise, not angry in public in the first breath, but careful, legal, and clean. I was too old for stunts and too proud for drama. I knew how to read papers, how to look up a serial number on a microchip, how to count evidence into a pile that would not be laughed at. I circled one line on the pad and wrote, use his own voice against him. My plan took shape like a house blueprint. First, gather every message, every voice recording, every screenshot of the jokes in the group chat where they call themselves clever for getting rid of old people. Second, get witnesses Mario, Rosa, the neighbor who always waters his lawn at dawn. Third, document the forgery in the van, license plates, registration for the rehoming service. Fourth, prepare a simple reveal that would make the town see the truth without me having to shout. I thought about the kind of humility I had taught my grandson all those years, about honesty, about asking before taking. They had laughed at that teaching, as if it were quaint. I had been patient too long. The plan warmed inside me like a coal. Not cruel. Correct. I would show him what his choices meant. I would show the neighborhood what could happen when family decided they knew better than the person who had lived a life. I would not let them call it mercy. I would name it theft. I practiced my calm on the phone. I practiced speaking measured sentences that would be hard to twist. When my grandson texted that night with a shrug and a short, he's with someone who can care for him, I saved it. Every careless word he had used would be a building block in the house of truth I planned to erect. I slept poorly that night with the legal pad under my pillow like a Bible. I started at the small things most people miss. Vet receipts, registration forms, the microchip paperwork. Each paper had my name and shaky signature and a date stamp. I matched them to my calendar, wrapping my mind around routines that proved ownership. Then I looked back to my phone, old photos of Sparky on my lap, videos of him chasing a leaf, and audio notes where my grandson had once joked about saving me from another dog. The voice notes showed a pattern. I took screenshots. I cataloged the group chat where they had shared those laughing emojis and a meme about old people stuff. The messages stung because they were so casual, the kind of cruelty that thinks it's clever. I organized everything into folders on my computer. Dates, witness names, photos, and receipts. I wrote a timeline that would read like a simple story a child could follow. Grandpa owns dog. Grandson removes tag. Grandson places dog in van. Dog ends up sold. I wanted no gray. I wanted the truth to stand simple and bright. Then Mario came by with surprise. A neighbor had seen my grandson remove Sparky's microchip tag and had written down the man's face who accepted the dog at the van. The neighbor gave me a note with a name. Each detail tightened case like a shoelace being pulled neat. I felt a strange mix of tiredness and excitement. I had been a man of small rights my whole life, repairing a roof, balancing a checkbook, keeping promises. Now those small rights would do something big. I set an alarm to call the free legal clinic in the morning. I placed a call to the vet and asked if they could confirm the microchip number with a quick look. Proof was becoming a quiet army around me. My heart was not the same as it had been when I first walked into the yard without a dog. It was angrier, steadier, less trusting of easy words like found. I knew I needed more than papers. I needed voices that would not disappear. Rose had always been a friend. She liked gardening and kept a spare room for visitors. I called her, hands still smelling faintly of newspaper pages, and told her the whole story without the theatrics. She did not gasp or get dramatic. She said, "Bring Sparky here for a week. We'll make some pictures. Let him be safe." Her voice was plain and quiet, the kind of voice that makes hard things possible. I told Rose about the photo idea that had been turning in my head. A single image that would say, without yelling, what they could not deny. She laughed softly and said she would make the backyard look like a movie set. She knew dogs and had an old camera. I felt strange asking for help like this. I had always been the one who helped others. But when someone takes what belongs to you, you get brave in different ways. Rosa picked up Sparky like he had been coming home for months. He leapt into her lap as if he had always known her. The photo she sent that afternoon was small and perfect. Sparky asleep in a sunbeam, front paws crossed, a little grin on his face. My heart did a strange thing at the sight. I felt the sting of betrayal soften for a second into relief. I thought about the caption I would write, just 3 words that would say everything. I typed them and then erased them and typed again. The photo was not a weapon, I thought. It was a truth. Still, the idea of showing it to my grandson made my stomach flip. I copied one of his old voice notes, the callous one where he said, "He's just a dog, Grandpa." I had my 2 pieces. A picture would have become safe, and his own voice reducing my life to a joke. The plan settled in me like a calm hand on a fevered forehead. I would use what he had said. The next moves would be quiet and precise. I spent the next hours compiling screenshots, messages, the group chat jokes, the transfer pending scribble, and the photo of Sparky with Rosa. I labeled each file with a date. I learned how to export voice notes and add them to the photo as a small audio file. It felt strange, like learning a new craft in late life. Fingers clumsy around my phone. But I liked how the evidence put together told a clear story. My grandson's voice, recorded in casual, sat beside a picture of a dog content and safe. It made a strange, tight argument. He had said one thing and my life showed another. I rehearsed how I would send it. I decided to message him privately first. I did not want to make a scene before I saw what his reaction would be. I wrote a short message. "This is what you made." Then I attached the photo and the voice note. I hit send with my thumb trembling. The read receipt pinged almost instantly. I felt the reaction like someone exhaling near me. He called right away. His voice sounded thin, surprised at first. "Where did you get Sparky?" I stayed calm. Calmness can feel like control. I said simply, "He's safe?" He accused me of blackmail, voice rising. "You're trying to ruin me." I said, "I'm trying to show you what you did." He slammed the phone. The snap of disconnected air felt personal. I sat with the silence and tasted metal in my mouth. I had expected denial, but the speed of his anger took me by surprise. Minutes later, my neighbor had already screenshotted the private photo and posted it in the community group with a mocking headline. My private plan had a ripple. The town was waking up. The first leak felt like a breach of trust, but it also showed the truth spread. That leak would become the thing that pushed my small plan into something bigger. The community group exploded. My private photo, meant only for my grandson, was suddenly public with a snarky caption. People chimed in, some with sympathy, others with the kind of mean little comments that feel larger when they join together. I watched it spread like a small fire. Someone tagged my grandson under the post. His employer, it turned out, had people watching local news and community chatter. The post reached farther than my quiet plan had intended. My stomach churned, but a part of me was steady. I had wanted the truth to be seen. Now it was. I received messages from neighbors I barely knew. Some supportive, some curious. A young woman messaged, "My grandma had the same thing happen. Thank you for showing this." A man I did not know wrote, "Good on you, sir." An influencer I had never heard of DM'd me, asking if I would do an interview. The noise made my head buzz. My grandson tried to spin it on his own feed, making a video about safety concerns and protecting my grandfather from a fragile situation. But someone posted a screenshot of his earlier, too old message. The tide turned in that comment thread, like water finding crack. Suddenly, People saw the pattern. The callous text, the laugh emoji, the private transfer slips. The town's tone shifted from gossip to anger. A neighbor remembered an old ordinance about animal transfers and consent. That legal detail felt like a gift. I called a free legal aid clinic that day. They listened and asked me for copies of my paperwork. Their voices were calm and practical. "We can file a claim," they said. "You have more here than you think." I felt like a man being handed a map. The small fires of social shame were dangerous, but they also lit a path. I realized I had created a quiet storm that needed directing. I would not let it become a circus. I would use it to bring the dog back and to make the truth stand in a place the town could not ignore. When the legal clinic told me what I could do, it felt like learning steps to a dance. They explained small claims processes, the elements of unauthorized transfer, and how to submit the microchip documentation as proof. They asked for the vet records, the photos, Mario's license plate image, and the group chat screenshots. I stuffed everything into a folder, like a man packing to go on a trip. I wrote a short statement of events, clear and simple, dates, times, names. The woman on the phone said, "Don't make threats. Stick to facts." I liked that. Facts were a steady thing. Meanwhile, the community hum kept rising. A local radio host called and asked if I would come on live. I hesitated at first. I don't like the sound of my voice in public, but I knew this was a chance to make the story simple and unarguable. I agreed. I practiced my sentences in the mirror. "He is my dog." I rehearsed. I never gave permission. The morning of the interview, the radio host read parts of the group chat aloud. Voices flooded the line. People angry at entitled behavior and others calling for mercy. The host's tone was fair, not sensational. He asked me what I wanted. I said I wanted Sparky returned and for my grandson to admit what he did. The host's question made my grandson's world more complicated. He texted me. Mom called HR. Then in quick succession, we're being canceled. I looked at the folder papers and felt both exhausted and fixed. The public attention had eyes now. I did not crave that attention, but I understood its utility. It could pry open doors that papers could not. I waited to see if my grandson would take the calm way I offered, truth and repair, or the frantic way that would try to bury everything. The next move would decide a lot. My grandson came to the door the next day. He looked thinner than usual, like the online heat had leached the color out of him. He stood there with his cap in his hands, eyes darting, words catching. "I didn't mean people went crazy," he said. He tried to explain in breathless pieces. The girlfriend, the fear of being judged, a panic that made him choose the easiest path. He offered to get Sparky back, to apologize publicly, to quit his job if necessary. His voice trembled in a way I had only ever seen when he scraped his knee as a child. I listened. I had decades of patience, and I had used most of them. The boy who had once climbed into my lap looked like a man who had learned how to avoid consequences. I felt a complicated thing. Anger, yes, but also a small tenderness of the man who clearly did not understand the depth of what he had done. I told him I would hear him, but I would not rush my judgment. "Tell the truth," I said simply. Those two words, when they came out, felt like a bell. He fell silent, and then, like a slow leak, the truth poured out. He confessed he had handed Sparky to impress someone, to avoid burden that might make him less appealing. The words landed colder than I expected. The selfishness made him small. I told him he could apologize, but it must be public and it had to be earned. I laid out terms calm as a doctor. A public apology, volunteer hours at the shelter, and a signed admission that he had given Sparky away without permission. He resisted at first. What if his job fired him? He said, what if people called him names? I listened to it all. Then I surprised him. I told him I had already filed a small claims notice for emotional distress on Sparky's behalf. The fierceness of that fact made him pale. He realized the stakes were not just about a job or a bad day. He realized his choice had legal and moral weight. The look on his face was not just fear. It was a dawning of accountability. For the first time in a long while, he seemed small in the way a child is small before a parent. I had wanted him to know what it felt like to be seen and corrected. I wanted him to own it. After the confession, I set firm terms. He would go on the radio and tell the truth. He would volunteer at the animal shelter for a set number of hours. He would sign a short statement admitting he transferred the dog without permission. I wanted something practical that showed he understood the harm. He argued about privacy and humiliation. He begged me not to ruin his job. I looked at him and saw the same hands that used to hold my fingers when he slept. "You have to fix what you broke," I said, quiet and steady. He left angry and frightened and said he'd think about it. I felt uncertain. I did not want to make him lose everything, but I wanted him to feel the consequences he had tried to avoid. Meanwhile, the trail to Sparky kept pulsing. The rehoming service called and then stopped answering. Then a message arrived. Sparky had been sold to someone who resold dogs. My heart flinched. Someone had moved him across state lines. Panic rose like hot water. The record showed a breeder's name. I felt a coldness that had nothing to do with weather. The breeder's photos were a small, cruel echo of the dog I loved, an animal that looked similar, caged in a kennel, eyes dull. I called every number I could find. The community responded like a net. Volunteers scoured online marketplaces, shelters, and message boards. Mario and Rosa knocked on neighbors' doors. A tracker pinged a microchip in another state. The sound of that ping felt like hope and ache at once. I realized this was no longer just a family problem. It was a small town fight. People who had once waved from yards earlier now texted maps and phone numbers. There was a new urgency, a feeling that we were all in this for the same reason. To bring a lost thing home and to show that taking from the vulnerable would not be effortless. The hunt for Sparky became organized like a rescue mission in a small movie. Volunteers split tasks. Some scoured ads. Others called known resellers. Someone tracked a microchip ping to a property owned by a man who had a history of selling animals. The name showed up in a reporter's inbox full of tips. The breeder seemed like a shadow from classifieds. Good at hiding, known for buying and reselling dogs. The shelter posted my story, and the breeder started getting calls from outraged donors and customers. His phone began to ring with people who wanted to know how a puppy could end up that way. The breeder's tone in his first emails was defensive. Then he got nervous. My grandson begged me to pay. "Just pay them and move on," he whispered like a man who wanted to wash his hands of the mess. He was afraid to lose his job, afraid to be known as the man who gave away an old dog. I thought of all the times I had seen him choose the easier path. I thought about the kind of lesson that sticks, not humiliation for its own sake, but repair and accountability. I handed the phone to Rosa and asked her to record the breeder's next call. She did not hesitate. Rosa is blunt. She thinks what is wrong should be shown honest and clear. The breeder's next call was different. He tried to bargain. Hush money, a small fee to keep the story quiet. He thought he could buy silence. Rosa pressed record and asked the right, simple questions. I felt like I was watching a trap close, not because I wanted to harm someone, but because I wanted the truth to be known and for what was wrong to be made right. The community would not let this be quiet. Rosa's recording was a small knife. The breeder's voice, casual and businesslike, asked for money to avoid trouble. He thought in terms of transactions. He thought that a few bills could close a mouth and bury a story. Rosa sent the audio to the radio host, to the shelter, and to the influencer who had offered help. The breeder's calm voice looked worse in a recorded wave. The county animal control, alerted by the shelter and the radio host, showed up with a warrant the next week. The way they moved felt official and final. I stood on the gravel road as they approached the breeder's property. Their presence made me stand straighter. I had never wanted to feel like a man who called men who would break the law, but I also wanted to stand on the right side of things. When they opened the kennel, Sparky bolted forward like someone waking from a bad dream. He ran to me faster than I thought a dog my age could move. He leapt into my arms, and I felt the exact spot in my chest unwind. Cameras flashed. The reunion was caught in a dozen small screens and live feeds. For a moment, I forgot all plans and papers and felt only the heat and weight of a dog who had remembered home. The crowd made a sound like a tide. My grandson watched from the edge, face white with shame. I felt a complicated thing, triumph, sorrow, and a small, raw joy. The town would see the picture of the dog back where he belonged. The breeder would face fines, and the rehoming service would get investigated. My role in this felt small and large at once. A man with a leash and a stubborn refusal to let wrong be easy. The rescue did more than bring Sparky home. It opened doors I had not thought to knock on. The rehoming service got complaints. The breeder faced fines, and county rules about animal transfers were pulled into the light. People who had shrugged at easy solutions began to see how easy those solutions could hurt others. My grandson's employer suspended him pending review. The radio host invited both of us back on air. I said yes, but only if my grandson would tell the truth. He agreed, though his voice shook. The day he went on the air, he was smaller than I had ever seen him. He spoke in a way that was not polished, but it was honest. He said my name and the mistake he had made. He explained his panic and the thoughtless decision that followed. He apologized. He said he would volunteer at the shelter. The host asked him why he had not asked us first. He said he had been afraid of appearing weak. People called in, some angry, some forgiving. My grandson's public apology did not erase what happened, but made the path to repair visible. He showed up at the shelter the next week, moving slowly through rows of cages, talking to nervous dogs and learning to clean buckets. It was not a performance. It was work. I watched him from across the room, the leash heavy in my pocket. The town watched too. I had wanted a chance for him to make it right. I had not wanted to break him. The balance between justice and cruelty is narrow. I tried to hold that balance as steady as I could. He learned to listen to volunteers who had been quiet teachers for years. He learned patience. He learned how small acts add up. After the public apology, the legal machinery did the rest. The small claim suit showed the forgery attempt and the transfer records. The rehoming services practices were investigated. The breeder faced fines and calls from business partners who did not want to be associated with a seller who broke rules. The town's attention helped. People who had once scrolled past stories of rehomed animals started looking for deeper signs. The shelter policy changed, with more checks and better tracing. I felt a relief like a winter sun. My grandson lost some work privileges. He had to explain himself to managers and colleagues he respected. He had to live with the knowledge that his choice hurt the people who trusted him. But he also spent hours cleaning the shelter yard and walking dogs no one else wanted. He wrote a short statement admitting the unauthorized transfer and posted it with a photo of himself volunteering. It was awkward and sincere. I accepted a quiet apology only after he completed his hours and after he spoke the truth on the radio for everyone to hear. The final photo I had sent him privately, the one of Sparky asleep in Rose's lap with the small caption, "He's happier here," had already spread. The last image I posted publicly was of Sparky asleep in my lap, captioned, "This is home." People liked that picture perhaps because it was simple and true. The town learned something that does not make for headlines easily. Sometimes doing the right thing takes slow steps and evidence, not only fury. The days after felt like both a repair and a lesson. Sparky slept in his usual spot at the foot of my chair, snoring softly, dreaming of the bright sun in Rose's yard and the smell of my slippers. I watched him and felt grateful in a way that made my chest ache. My grandson and I had uneasy dinners, where words were careful and small. He asked questions now, about dogs, about the responsibility of care. He admitted things he had not known, how a small step of thoughtlessness could ripple outward, how quick solutions can hide harm. He washed bowls and brushed dogs at the shelter, and when he came home tired, I could see the change like a slow polish. We did not pretend everything was fixed. Trust that gets cracked takes time to smooth. But he showed up. People in the neighborhood began to nod when they saw me and to offer small help with errands and groceries. The experience had pulled the small community tighter. In some ways, I had not expected. Kids waved their hands at me during school pickup, like I had been a story they told at their breakfast table. The radio host invited me back, not to gloat, but to talk about community responsibility. I said that our town had learned a cause for small cruelties. I said that accountability could be made kind if done right. People called in with stories, some worse, some like mine. The shelter reported an increase in inquiries about responsible rehoming. The county discussed an ordinance that would tighten consent requirements. I sat with those changes like a man who had planted a tree and watched it slowly bud. My life felt steadier, quieter, and more full than it had immediately after the door slammed. Sparky's soft breathing was a small, constant answer. One afternoon, a young woman came to the door carrying a plate of muffins. She had read the story in the group and wanted to say she was sorry for how the town had treated me first when the photo leaked. Her apology was simple and genuine, not performative. We talked about small things, gardening, the odd joys of old radios, and she listened when I told her about Sparky's habits. These small chats became a part of the new normal. People who had scrolled past me now stopped longer at the post office window. The town's tone had shifted from idle gossip to checking in. My grandson started a small fundraiser with friends to help the shelter with medical costs for rescued animals. He wanted to show he had learned, and he worked quietly on the project without much fanfare. I was surprised by how the community rallied, not just at me, but for a broader change. The shelter reported more volunteers, better screening processes, and donations that kept their doors open longer. The rehoming service faced complaints and eventually reformed parts of their process. The breeder paid fines and had to submit to inspections. None of this felt like revenge. It felt like correction. It felt like mending a net that had holes. I often sat with Sparky on my porch, watching children ride bikes with their knees banged and scabbed, laughing loudly. Those children now knew a small story about how adults could be wrong and how they could fix it. The lesson had spread in small, useful ways. I felt less alone in the evenings. I felt that our small town, messy and bright, had learned to be a little kinder. Sometimes at night, I would replay the first moments, the slam of the door, the laughing emoji, the photo on my phone. It still left a small bruise. But then I would look at Sparky sleeping and remember the rescue, the van, the breeding farm, the county agents, the crowd. That whole messy path had been real work, and it had a clear end. I thought often about shame and repair. I had wanted my grandson to feel consequences, but I did not want him destroyed. I wanted him to see what thoughtless acts do, to learn empathy, to rebuild trust the hard way. He did, mostly. Watching him volunteer, hearing him speak plainly about his mistake in front of people who had once judged him, I felt a small pride. He was learning the slow math of responsibility. He had called his parents and given a full account. They were distant at first, but softened when they saw he was doing the work. The shelter's director even called to thank me for nudging the community into better practices. Sometimes it takes a face to change a system, she said. Her words felt like water to a dry plant. I had not wanted to break my grandson, so much as teach him how to be better. That felt like mercy, in a way that had teeth. Sparky, oblivious of the meaning of it all, simply liked being walked again. He pulled at the leash with the excitement of a dog who had seen too many doors, but remembered one particular hand. The radio interview slowed, and the town's attention drifted to the next story. My life returned to a usable rhythm. Morning walks, coffee on the porch, calls to the vet for routine checks. People nodded when they passed. My grandson learned to carry his volunteer ID with a kind of quiet pride. He helped the shelter with social posts, learned to clean cages, and practiced patience with dogs who needed extra time. His friends now patched up the fundraiser quietly. He spoke in staff meetings about responsibility in small ways that mattered, about making right choices when no one was watching. The legal case wound down as the rehoming service paid fines and agreed to better practices. The breeder's business dimmed as partners backed away. It felt like a slow, fair end. I did not relish the public attention. I was glad it had helped, and then it left. The most important work had been done in private, volunteer hours, honest conversations, repaired relationships. I and my grandson started sitting together on the porch in the evenings more often. We did not fill the silence with apologies every time. Sometimes we simply watched the sky, and it felt enough. Sparky would do his small dances at dinner, bringing us both a kind of amusement. Once, my grandson handed me the leash without being asked. The small gesture felt like a step across a bridge. I accepted it without comment. The leash was not a symbol so much as a shared task. We worked at that shared task in daily, quiet ways. Months passed. Sparky's coat grew glossy again, a small, shining proof of care. My grandson had kept his promise to the shelter and to me. He had written an honest piece once for the local paper about learning to be responsible. He described the small, painful steps of making amends. People read it, and some sent messages saying they had been moved. I did not know if that changed the deep parts of him, but I saw the surface shift. He smiled more easily, and he listened better to voices older than his own. The shelter reported that more people started checking for microchips before accepting animals, and that stray intake had gone down a bit because of better education. My heart did something strange, relief mixed with a quiet pride. The town had become, in small ways, more careful. Rose and Mario became small, steady friends in the story I had once thought would only be a private hurt. They popped by with cookies and laughed about dumb things my grandson used to do as a kid. The leash was a simple instrument that tied parts of my life together again. It was not the end of all pain. The memory of the open door and the phone's laugh remained. But the memory had shifted from anger to lesson. I felt older and strangely lighter. The story we had made had not been about punishment alone, but about the possibility of repair. That was the real surprise. One afternoon, the county sent a letter about new guidelines for animal rehoming in our area. They thanked community members who had reported questionable practices. I read the letter twice, the way one reads a good meal menu, savoring the clear language. Consent required, the main line said, and it felt like a small victory written in plain ink. The shelter invited me to a small meeting to talk about safe rehoming. I went not speaking like a man who had been wronged, but like someone who had learned and wanted to help others avoid the same mistake. My grandson stood beside me as we addressed a room of volunteers and neighbors. He spoke briefly, no fanfare, just a simple, "I did wrong. I'm learning." The room nodded, some faces softening. The county officer who had led the raid on the breeder came up and thanked me quietly. "You did right by the dog," he said. I felt a kind, slow warmth. The community had turned the moment into something better than spectacle. We had pushed for rules and education, and that felt like a deeper victory than a headline. I thought then about how easy it had been for some people to shrug. I thought about how important it is to speak up when small harms look like convenience. The small town had learned, and we had a guideline to keep other people safer. It felt like a second chance for more than one dog. After everything had calmed, my grandson and I took Sparky on a long walk. The three of us, man, boy, and dog, moved through the neighborhood at a slow, good pace. People waved. Some nodded with recognition, some with curiosity. We walked past the school where the kids played, and Sparky trotted like a small king, proud and content. My grandson and I did not speak much. We did not need to. The walk itself was a language. He reached over and squeezed my hand for a moment, not an apology but in a small, warm acknowledgement. The leash felt light in my hand. I thought about the first day the door slammed and how sharp the sound had been. I thought about the slow path back to trust. Time had smoothed edges but not erased a lesson. We passed Rose's house, and she waved from the garden with the camera on the table, as if she might take another picture. I thought about how pictures lie and how they tell the truth at the same time. I felt a comfort that was steady and simple. The town had changed in small ways that mattered. My life was quieter and richer for it. Sparky stopped occasionally to sniff a tree trunk, and my grandson laughed at the old way the dog tilted his head. The sun was warm and not too bright. For once, I felt like an old man who had kept something important, not by holding too tightly, but by staying close, watching, and speaking up when something went wrong. The radio host invited us back for a follow-up. He wanted to talk about how the community had changed since the story broke. My grandson agreed to come with me. We rehearsed nothing. On air, we spoke plainly about the importance of asking before making choices for others, about the quiet, ruinous power of thoughtlessness. I talked about the small legal steps someone could take and the importance of microchips and proper transfers. He talked about how volunteering changed him. Callers chimed in, some with similar stories, some with gratitude for the change in rules. One woman called to say that because of the guidelines, she had been prevented from taking a dog that would have been rehomed without consent. The host read her letter aloud. It felt like the practical, everyday kind of victory you want. Rules that keep little harms from happening. After the show, people came by the shelter to volunteer. My grandson got a job helping with weekend cleanups and occasional outreach. He said later, "I don't know if I would have learned that lesson without it." I told him that only time would make the lesson part of his bones. The town's attention had been a harsh teacher, but it had taught something meaningful. We walked home from the station together, and Sparky trotted at our heels. The leash connected three of us, and I felt less alone. The path forward was still long, but it was honest. Neighbors who once waved with distance now stopped for a chat. The kid across the street, Mario, told me he was thinking about volunteering at the shelter too. Rosa and I started a small group to help older pet owners who needed assistance. Dog walking, vet rides, small repairs. We called it Neighbors with Leashes, a clumsy but earnest name. The group met weekly, and the turnout surprised me. People wanted to help, but sometimes they needed a reason. The story had given them one. My grandson taught a small class for teens at the shelter about responsibility and the paperwork of adoption. He talked about the microchip and consent as if they were secret spells. The teens listened like they were hearing something important for the first time. I watched them from a bench and felt a quiet warmth. The town had become a little smaller, like a house with doors that actually opened. People looked after one another in small, practical ways. When Sparky got older and slower, neighbors would often take him out if I needed to rest. My grandson would decline sometimes and then accept other times, learning the balance between help and independence. The leash became a symbol not of ownership, but of shared care. I liked that. I liked the idea that small harms could be healed by small acts of kindness repeated many times. Life settled into this gentle rhythm. Walks, shelter shifts, neighborhood meetings, good coffee, and the news now focusing on other things. The rehoming service adjusted its practices after fines and complaints. They started a required consent form and a check-in policy. People call these changes small, but in my mind, small changes were the most important. They keep everything from falling apart. My grandson sometimes apologized in small ways. A dish washed, a bag picked up at the store. He did not make grand gestures. He learned that small habits matter more than theatrics. We grew used to those changes. The town grew used to seeing us together. The three of us, man, grandson, and dog. Sparky's tail wagged more like a metronome of contentment than the frantic spring it once was. I thought about forgiveness and how it is not a single thing, but a process. It is earned slowly by showing up and doing the steady work. The world had not needed a loud revenge. It needed a careful correction. I felt a small gratitude that the lesson was made public enough to help others, yet not cruel enough to break a young man. He had learned, and the town had learned, that respect matters. We kept living, and in that living we repaired a small corner of the world. One afternoon, I found a scribbled note on my kitchen table. My grandson's handwriting, neat and smaller than I remembered. It said simply, "Thanks for not giving up on me." I sat with it like it was a warm stone. He had left early for the shelter, and when I saw him later his face was tired but calm. He handed me a mug with a crooked smile painted on it. An awkward attempt at a gift. I laughed softly and thanked him. These small moments felt like a balm. We were not fixed into a neat story. We were making quiet steps every day. Sparky patted around our feet and then settled into a spot as if to say, "This is where I am." The leash hung on the hook, ready for another walk. Rosa popped in with a pie and sat with us on the stoop, talking about nothing in particular. The town had settled, and the story had become a lesson people told each other at bus stops. It was no longer a scandal but a cautionary tale. I liked that better. I liked the idea that other people might think twice because of what had happened here. I thought about how easy cruelty can be when you call it convenience. I thought about how repair needs patience, evidence, and work. Sparky grew more gray around the muzzle. He slept more and barked less. The walks were slower, and we took more rests on benches, letting the afternoons pass like a comfortable book. My grandson and I sometimes sat quietly on the porch when dusk came, not needing to fill the air. We watched shadows lengthen and listened to the neighbors lock their doors. Sometimes we talk about small things, old songs, the kind of bread that rises well, how the shelter could use more blankets. He told me about small victories at work, how people had begun to trust him again. He did not boast. He simply said these things like a man who had learned the value of steady effort. The leash creaked slightly as Sparky moved in his sleep. I felt a slow gratitude for the ordinary, the daily routines that glue life together. The event had not made us saints. We had been chastened and mended. The town had learned and changed because we held the truth up and did the work that followed. I thought about the day the door had slammed and how ridiculous it seemed now that anyone thought the easiest choice would be best. We had learned better. I felt an older kind of contentment that came from knowing you had done right by someone small and faithful. Years later, the story would pop up now and then in the community feed when someone mentioned responsible rehoming. Kids who had been young when it happened would tell the tale in simplified bits as they grew up. I would smile at the memory and at the difference it had made. My grandson sometimes helped with outreach, teaching teens how to ask questions before taking on an animal. He had found ways to make something positive from his mistake. The shelter had fewer incidents of unauthorized transfers, and more people called to ask how to do it properly. The county kept better records. My name would be mentioned kindly at community meetings like a small footnote to a larger change. I liked the idea that a stubborn old man with a leash had nudged the town to be better. Sparky lived into his later years with dignity and warmth. He spent afternoons on the porch and mornings under the table. When his back grew stiff, we took shorter walks. When his hearing faded, he tilted his head the same way. I thought about the quiet arc of lives and how small actions ripple. The moment when a door had slammed was fierce, but it led to a long road of repair. I felt a soft pride in that path. On a slow morning, Sparky lay on a rug and breathed in long, small breaths. He looked older than his years, and I knew those breaths were precious. I carried him gently outside and sat on the stoop while he dozed in the sun. My grandson was there, quieter now, with hands that had learned patience. The town around us moved on, but the small work we had done held. The shelter was stronger, the guidelines clearer, and neighbors helped each other more often. I thought of the photo I had sent, the one that sparked the whole thing. It had been small, meant to show a truth. It grew into something bigger. I did not regret what I did. I had wanted to name the harm and to bring back a dog who needed home. In doing so, we had fixed a small part of the world. I looked at my grandson and saw a man who carried mistakes with him and learned from them. He handed me the leash without a word, and together we took another slow walk. Sparky's tail thumped once or twice and then rested. The leash was a simple cord holding us in the present, in the work of being good neighbors and honest people. The last days with Sparky were gentle. He slept more and dreamed less of running. We gave him soft meals and warm blankets. Neighbors would peek in and bring a treat or a small, intended kindness. My grandson read to him sometimes, chapters from old books with stories of quiet men and loyal animals. He learned to speak softly and to keep hands steady. One evening, when the light was low and honey-colored, Sparky lay on my lap and breathed his last breath. It was a small, clean passing. I felt a great sadness, yes, but also a deep, odd peace. We had done right by him when it mattered. The town grieved a little with me. People left notes and flowers. My grandson hugged me and said, "I'm sorry, Grandpa," and did not make it into a show. He meant in the way that mattered most, quiet and true. In the weeks after, people would still mention the story, but mostly they would talk about the shelter improvements and how neighbors watched out for one another. I would look at the leash hanging on the hook and remember the first slam of the door, the slow plan, the rescue, and the long, steady repair. Justice, in the end, had not been cruel. It had been a set of small corrections that taught a young man how to be better and helped the town learn to care. I walked out into the yard with no dog at my side and felt the air like a new thing. I had loved well, lost well, and helped make a few lives better. The photo I sent had made him regret his choice, yes, and he paid dearly in the currency of responsibility. But most of all, we repaired a small part of the world together. Please subscribe to get the first update on our coming true life Ravenge stories.